And we welcome to the program now Mike Hurst, a former U.S. attorney. Mike, always good to see you, sir.
Great to see you too, Gerard. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, you, my friend, I consider a legal scholar, and one thing I know is we got lots of legal stuff going on.
I tell you, we're full of it, right?
What is that
old song? Send lawyers, guns, and money. You know?
Exactly. Well, we were just talking about the situation with former President Donald Trump. Of course, I called it a verdict. I don't know if is it considered a verdict when the Attorney General, right, of the state of New York says, hey, you committed financial fraud, if you will, and therefore you owe $350 million plus interest.
Plus interest, yeah. It's a civil fraud case, so it's not technically up to the standard of criminal beyond a reasonable doubt, but it is a civil fraud case. But yeah, as we talked off the air, it's kind of confusing or really concerning that in this case where, technically he was brought before the tribunal for, lying on, documents to financial institutions. Well, none of the financial institutions were harmed.
Right.
They all actually made money.
Yeah.
No one was really harmed in this. And so you have a quote-unquote civil fraud case where you're owing almost $500 million with no fraud, or excuse me, no harm.
Damages.
That's right. It's kind of it's head-scratching. And, a lot of the critics of it, obviously, for point to this is a vendetta. This is just to go after the former president and just try to get him any way they can.
Man,
and it sure seems that way.
Well, what concerns me, I was sharing with this with you earlier. We had the law professor from Ole Miss, Christopher Green, on the program right after this decision was handed down. I thought maybe this was something unique in the state of New York, and he clarified, no, this actually, there's laws, I guess, on the books in all 50 states, which means we're all subject to this.
Yeah, normally if you lose at the trial level and you need to appeal, there's a bond required. In my experience, most of the times these bonds are waived or not actually not required by the court. So there's discretion there. But here we see that the judge in New York and the attorney general specifically pressing for it because it harms the former president. And I think that's the real impetus behind this. It's not about actually securing a bond for appeal. It's actually about harming Trump.
Yeah, totally. So I believe that Mr. Trump's attorneys have notified, I don't know if they've notified the court at this point or they've at least announced. Okay, they've officially notified. Hey, we can't come up with this money.
That's right.
By the way, we couldn't find anybody to underwrite this thing. They said they contacted 30 different bonding organizations to get an underwriter. Yep. Nobody would underwrite.
Yeah, the insurance companies, according to the lawyers in their court filings, the insurance companies won't underwrite him for this bond. Even with the massive amounts of real estate holdings he has, they just won't do it.
So next step, potentially, we're hearing in the news is that the state of New York is going to begin seizing assets and liquidating assets.
Yeah, I think that's the ultimate plan here is to put him in such a position he can't get a bond. Now they start going after his assets.
That's incredible.
It is incredible. It should concern every single American that someone, a rogue prosecutor, can take you into a courtroom without any type of harm to anyone or the public or anything else and prove a quote-unquote technical violation of law, a black letter law, without any real jury appeal, without any real consequences to the public, and now you lose everything you worked your entire life for.
It sort of hints at, feels a little bit like the sort of stuff you'd see in Russia or in a nation that truly is under the control and the power of a regime that just does whatever it wants. Let me just go grab my political enemy off the street and drag them into court for some crazy reason, and just sort of knock them to their feet. It's what it feels like. And this is all about, is it not, trying to render him incapable of running for office?
Absolutely. I think that's exactly what it is. And we've seen it. I've seen it both as a former prosecutor and as a criminal defense attorney with cases where we technically have a violation of the law, but when you get down to it, if there's no harm, what are we doing here? Why are we proceeding? Why are we going forward if there's no harm to the public, no harm to another individual or another company? If there's no harm, that is why the judicial system is here. It is to correct or alleviate or make sure no harms occur.
Yeah.
And in this case, there was no harm, and I've seen it on the state level. I've seen it at the federal level. Fortunately, as a good prosecutor, when you have a case brought to you by an agent that technically meets the evidence. Kind of like I know this is not popular, but the Rob Hur report, his investigation of President Biden. Yes, he technically had the evidence to justify the black and white letter of the law. But a good prosecutor knows that he has to prove that. And he knows that if there's no jury appeal, if a jury's not going to convict a former president who has lost his mind, frankly, you're not taking that case. And the same thing in the civil fraud context in this case. If there's no harm, if there's no loss, why are we doing this?
I got to tell you, my years in business dealing with my great attorneys, they would always say that over and over again, were there damages. And unfortunately, I didn't have too much of that kind of stuff, but I just learned from them, that meant something.
Right.
That, yeah, sure, you can drag people into court all day long, but if there hasn't been a victim here that somebody's incurred damages, you're not going to get really anything friendly from the court.
There's a famous speech by former Attorney General Robert Jackson, who was ultimately on the United States Supreme Court, and he spoke to U.S. attorneys, 80 years ago, and he said that the most powerful weapon, or the most powerful force, rather, in America outside of military and wartime are prosecutors.
Huh.
And so we see that now, that we have this lawfare mentality going after former President Trump and using every lever, even in the indictments, alleging things that really have no basis in law, like the New York indictment, the Georgia indictment. These things, there is no track record. There is no precedent for it. Yet all they have to do is prove probable cause to get an indictment. That old, you can indict a ham sandwich in the grand jury.
Right.
I mean, that's what they've figured it out, that's all they have to do to quote unquote jam him up, or really tarnish him to try to prevent his reelection.
And so then you're applying the law in such a subjective fashion.
And I think that's why George Soros focused on prosecutors. I think that's why he focused on not necessarily the presidential races, the Senate races, the House. Let's go look at the individuals who have real power in our country. And it's the ones that we give the power to decide whether we haul you, Gerard, into a court of law to stand for either civil fraud or criminal fraud.
Well, by the same token, they have the power to dismiss those who've committed
Absolutely.
Legitimate crime. They're on the street.
They are the threshold. I can tell you in cases where I've had agents bring cases to me that they were, quote unquote slam dunk cases, and I've got everything. Well, they didn't. And we as prosecutors, we're the last line of defense to ensure that our constitutional rights of all citizens are protected and are stood up for.
Yeah, because it's futile for law enforcement to go out there and arrest them, right?
Right.
If they put them before a prosecutor says, oh, no, you can go.
That's exactly right.
That's happening in this country right now.
Absolutely. And it's futile to do that when you don't have the evidence, or we don't have what we need to convict, or to, in this case, this is a rogue prosecutor, this is a rogue judge, and I think they just got it wrong in New York.
Scary.
Yep.
Is this something, Mike, that could be appealed all the way up to the highest court in the land?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. Because that may be where we're headed at this point. But how do you do that
a lot of these cases,
if you can't make this appeal bond? You can't get the appeal bond, so then they start seizing assets. Do you then maybe file a counter lawsuit against the state for seizing your assets?
Yeah, I'm not sure about that, actually. I don't know if he has much recourse after not being able to post a bond, and then the state starts going after his assets. So
it's not right.
Yep.
To me, the fact that it's former President Trump, to me, is irrelevant. What's relevant here is the point you made exceedingly, which I completely agree with and needs to be made, which is nobody was hurt here.
Right.
In fact, you've got the other parties didn't file the lawsuit against the debtor, Mr. Trump, say, hey, you didn't pay us back. Well, you'd have a case there.
Right.
I get that.
Well,
that's not what happened.
And
here,
to your point, that is how our justice system is supposed to be. It's supposed to be blind. It is supposed to be, we don't care who the person is that we are alleging committed either civil fraud or criminal fraud. I mean, I think I read some accounts where if this is now the standard, that the New York Attorney General can go after anyone that she believes has fraudulently put numbers on a financial disclosure, then that shuts down everyone in New York City.
Okay.
I mean, every developer, every business, everything. And so that's why it's so obvious what they're doing here. They found a loophole. They found a way to get after Trump because they have this Trump derangement syndrome.
Right. Well, think about the fact that New York City, that's the center of the financial universe.
Yeah,
Let's be
absolutely.
honest. There's 8 million people in the New York City area. You just now show up and decide to leverage this rather, I think, obscure statute. Oh, it's got nothing to do with who this person is.
That's the only reason we're talking about it is because of who it is.
Oh, gosh. We got Mike Hurst, former U.S. attorney in the Element Well studio. We'll come right back. We got to talk about the TikTok ban and get your thoughts on that. Stay with us, folks. Well, we're back in the Element Well studio. We're visiting with Mike Hurst, former U.S. attorney, talking some of the legal stuff happening in our country. So, wow, this potential ban of TikTok, the very popular application, video sharing application. We've got a measure that passed the U.S. House, has been transmitted to the Senate. It's sort of stalled, I think is a way to put it, in the Senate. It doesn't appear at this point that the votes are there. Of course, just to kind of set it up, the bill doesn't just outright ban the application from being available and used in the United States. It does unless the company TikTok divests itself of the parent company ByteDance, which is, for all intents and purposes, controlled by an arm of, an extension of the Chinese Communist Party. So, hey, as long as you guys divest, you're good to go here in the United States. Where do you see all this headed? What do you think?
You know, it's fascinating because right now we are living in probably the most interesting time for First Amendment jurisprudence in our nation. I mean, we just had the case with the NRA and the state government trying to regulate who could work with the NRA. What I see happening is if this bill in the House actually becomes law, I see it going all the way to the Supreme Court, and it'll be weighing the government's interest in national security with the First Amendment rights of a U.S.-based company, even though it is owned by foreign entities.
Okay, so by the same token, on a related note, you've got the Supreme Court taking up a case that deals with, I guess, the ability of, or the pressure is probably the better way to put it, coming from the government on social media platforms to post certain things, to remove certain content. And this really became prevalent during the COVID era when it seems like the government had a message it wanted to convey and people wanted to share other information using the platform, users of the platform. And the government apparently was instructing the platforms, oh, no, take that down. Don't let them say that. Go out here and do this. I mean, this seems like gross overreach by the government.
And directly from the White House. I mean, these statements
memos from the White House, right?
And so the case was brought by some individual users of social media apps, and as well as Louisiana and Missouri, the states. And a local judge in Louisiana actually put in a restraining order on the administration. Fifth Circuit upheld it. It was argued before the Supreme Court this week, and I got to tell you, the reaction that I've heard, that I've seen, is it wasn't well received. And what I mean by is the Supreme Court justices, a number, probably a majority of the Supreme Court justices, really questioned whether you could stop an administration from communicating or even persuading social media companies from taking things down. I think it was Justice Kavanaugh, who used to work in the Bush administration, talked about how, PR professionals in the White House would communicate with, individuals in the media often to tell them to, you better take that down, you better not run that, things like that. And that was the analogy that Kavanaugh and others, I think even Kagan, who had worked in the Clinton administration, had used. And even Justice Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett raised questions with the position of Louisiana and Missouri to push back on this whole, the administrations can't talk to social media, can't persuade, can't coerce. I think the term they're throwing around now is jawboning. That's what they call it now.
Okay.
But
technical legal term,
yeah, that's right. Yeah, real. But it really comes down to, is this just communications? Is this just the government talking to private actors, or is this actual coercion?
Yeah.
And that's what you saw in another related case where the National Rifle Association sued a state government agency, New York Department of Finance, who, after the Parkland shootings, had told the New York Department of Finance had told various insurance companies, banks, other regulated entities, you don't need to be doing anything with NRA. And they started really shutting out the NRA. And I got to tell you, the Supreme Court justices seem to be on the side of the NRA. And what's fascinating about that case, Gerard, is the NRA in that lawsuit is represented by the ACLU. So even the ACLU, I mean, we probably haven't seen this in 40 years. ACLU used to stand up for First Amendment rights left and right.
Right.
But in this case, ACLU is representing the NRA before the United States Supreme Court, saying the government has gone too far.
Unbelievable.
And if the government can start telling banks and insurance companies and other private entities to stop working with someone who they disagree with, imagine the power they have over you and I.
Yeah, well,
that's scary.
What really disturbed me is one of the justices, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, actually said that she's concerned that the First Amendment is making it harder for the government to censor speech. Gee, I thought that was the whole idea. I thought the entire Bill of Rights.
I'm just shaking my head right now. This is the same Supreme Court justice that could not answer the question, what is a woman?
That's right.
Yeah, when we start worrying about the government's ability to speak vis-a-vis the American citizens' ability to speak, I think we've completely flipped this country on its head. That's incredible.
I mean, correct me if I'm wrong. Aren't the entire Bill of Rights about limiting government and protecting the people?
It is protecting the people. I think it's we the people, not we the government. Yeah, that's and she's one of 9 votes on our Supreme Court.
I don't know where this is going to go, though. It's the
good thing we have is we do have a Supreme Court that's very pro First Amendment.
I agree.
In the last 3 or 4 years, the cases that have been coming out of the Supreme Court upholding various First Amendment rights has really been incredible.
Yeah.
And I think we'll see that same trajectory here, although in that social media case where the White House was reaching out and talking to social media, and they were shutting down accounts and posts of various vaccine-related things, I think the Supreme Court's probably not going to go quite that far. I think they're probably going to allow the federal government to continue to talk to and work with social media, because the case as I read it was not the best case in the sense that social media already has algorithms and other things to catch, what they perceive as a private company perceive as might be misinformation, and you really couldn't prove directly it was the White House or the Biden administration doing this vis-a-vis the private company.
Having a relationship, having an open dialogue, that doesn't bother me. But when they start attempting to wield their weight, right,
Absolutely.
and dictate, no, don't do this, do that, then I have a problem.
Well, yeah, when you're using the power of the government to do what your will against the rights, as you said, the First Amendment right of a citizen, I think we got real issues then.
Yeah, then you just look like you're an extension of the government,
right?
Which you shouldn't
become
be.
an agent of the government.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Okay, yeah, exactly.
And we've had, I'll put it in the criminal context. Anytime a private individual is working with the government, cooperating, doing things, whatever, that private individual can become "quote unquote" an agent of the government for purposes of protecting others from things that maybe the government can't do because of our Bill of Rights, our due process laws. You can't just get a random Joe Schmo off the street to do the government's bidding and not hold them to the same requirements that we have for the government.
Well, as well as I do, this whole issue of social media, it's relatively new. Mm-hmm. So I think it's kind of pushing the envelope on our laws,
right,
to a great extent, and so it's prudent for our lawmakers and those who are responsible for interpreting our laws. That would be the Supreme Court to just get with the program. Things are different.
And we have to be vigilant about it. I mean, for so many years, I felt like we were losing rights. Now I feel like we have a group. The state's attorneys generals is a perfect example. These 2 states have brought this lawsuit trying to stand up for you and my rights as an individual, as an American citizen to speak. We had not had that. I don't feel like when I was growing up. I feel like now we really have people that are standing up for those rights.
Yeah. Before you go, Tyson has been in the news, the big company Tyson, because they've been terminating American workers, at least this is what the reports are, and replacing them with illegals that have got some sort of legal representation to allow them to be hired. You heard anything about this?
I have not. I have not seen that.
This is crazy. Of course, there's some people that think, was this the plan all along, with this whole immigration thing? I'll just share you my thought on that before you go here is that we need to eliminate the minimum wage, in my view. Not that these people are working necessarily for minimum wage, but I think a lot of illegals come into our country and they willingly accept pay at or less than that.
What I can tell you is, before the Biden administration came into being, we had estimated 10 million illegal aliens in this country. In the 3 years the Biden administration has been here, the reports are there have been another 10 million.
Oh, it's double.
Admitted.
They're
it's
over
double
20
in 3 years.
Insanity.
That's insane. And you see some of these cities and counties that are beginning to allow them to get driver's license, to vote, to get services. I mean, you're exactly right. I think the ultimate end goal is for the Democratic politicians to have them voting and working at companies.
They deny that, of course, which is horse hockey. But, Mike, always good to see you. Appreciate you coming on.
Thank you.
Coming right back, folks. Half an hour left and tickets to give away.